Hi there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from Speech Kids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And today we're going to talk to Martha Adler, who is a really, really dear friend of mine, but more relevant to this discussion, she is a perinatal social worker by training with many, many years of experience, both in social work and also school counseling. And Martha is pretty much my basis for many of the parenting techniques and things and attitudes that I have. So Martha, welcome.
So nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. So we're going to talk about this very cheerful subject today called death and dying. So why should we be talking to little kids about death and dying? And should we be talking to little kids about death and dying?
Well, the answer to the second question is yes, we absolutely should be talking with them about it. And the why is that it's part of life. It's part of it. It happens. Death happens to all of us. Sometimes it happens sooner than we want it to, and sometimes it happens to people that we don't want it to happen to. But little children experience death from the time they see a dead bird. They see a dead bird on the sidewalk. They say, "Why is that bird not moving?" They experience the death of their own pets. They experience, they hear of somebody whose grandparent died. It's part of their lives, and we do them. The main reason that we need to talk with them about it a lot is that we do them a disservice if we pretend that it's not going to happen. It's what I would call an unimportant death, like the death of I've had pets that die, and they're very important, but they're not fundamentally undermining of the foundation of my life or of the life of a child if a pet dies or if a grandparent dies. I'm not minimizing the loss, but they need to. Our job is to prepare them for something that happens.
It sounds like what you're saying a little bit is like, if a pet dies, or even the bird on the sidewalk, that's like a practice run for
exactly
death. We will continue to experience death in our lives. And you've lost parents. Obviously, I have lost a parent and grandparents. And so it sounds like what you're saying is this is going to happen. Let's practice this in baby chunks.
Exactly right. And in olden times, how can I say this? Death used to be much more prominent in people's lives, in many people's lives, than it is now. People would live with grandparents, and then grandparents would die, and people lived shorter lives and all of that. But nowadays, when grandparents live far away, it's not, and there aren't so many multi-generational families. We would like to think that it's easy to not talk about it and to not address it, and it might be easy to not address it, but we have to. That's our job as parents, is to help kids understand that this happens, and that for the most part, it doesn't have to completely unravel our lives. We can help it unravel lives if we don't address it.
I'm remembering when my father died, my kids were really young. So that was 9 years ago now. So they were 7 and 4 maybe. And you were the person who said, no. They need to go to the funeral. They need to be a part of whatever's happening in your family. They need to be with the adults who are experiencing grief. And that was really hard and really counterintuitive, actually.
Really? Well,
yeah. Because it seems easier to insulate them from that.
Well, can I tell a story?
Please.
I had, when I was a counselor, some people at school that I worked at, some people came to me and said, "I just wanted you to know that my great grandmother died, and we're not going to tell our kids." Their children were 3 and maybe first grade, so 3 and 6. And I said, "Well, did they know this great grandmother?" And they said, "Oh yeah, they loved her. They loved her." The mother was heartbroken, and I said, "Well, what are you planning to tell them?" And they said, we're going to go to New York and we're going to come back and we're just not going to tell them. And I said, you, then they're going to ask, when can we see her again? What, you have to think through the steps of how you're going to handle this. Well, in the end, I convinced them, like I convinced you, to do the counterintuitive thing. And not only did they take their children to the service, but the 3-year-old spoke about her great grandmother in the home service afterwards. So, and she really could. She knew that this was an opportunity to say something wonderful about her great grandmother, and she was a wonderful little girl, and she just took this opportunity and ran with it. So, one time in my life as a professional grief counselor, did I agree with a parent's decision not to take a child to a funeral, and it was because there was going to be somebody at the funeral who, at the last family funeral, had like a very frightening psychotic break, and we agreed that this was probably going to be too much for the kids. I mean, we sort of jumped ahead to talking about funerals. Should we?
Well, yeah, no, I wanted to go back and ask you. So, okay, we agree that, okay, we're going to tell young kids about when people die and have
Correct.
them experience this. How are they processing that information? Like, what are they ready for at different stages? Can you talk a little bit about how kids are thinking about death and understanding that?
So people, under the age of 2, toddlers who are 2 and younger have a really, really limited understanding. They will understand, they will have a very good sense. Let's just take an example of a grandparent has died after a long illness. A 2-year-old will see parents crying and see older children crying and hear the questions that the older children are asking, but they really have they need sort of very basic emotional needs met and might have some regressive behaviors, but they really are going to have a hard time. They can't really grasp it. Starting around 3, though, you can explain. Kids have a beginning understanding because they have seen dead birds, or they have seen dead raccoons on the side of the road or whatever. So they have a greater cognitive grasp, but their experience is still one of confusion, because they don't, even ages 3, 4, 5, maybe up to 6, they don't understand that death means forever.
Yeah.
They don't, as we were talking about this yesterday in preparation, they don't understand. Kids will often say, well, where was I before I was born? Because they're trying to figure out, maybe you've done a good job of explaining where they came from and birds and the bees, however you do that. But they still don't quite understand. It's just, it's complicated, that miracle.
Well, it's only at age 3 too, when kids are, we talk about this all the time about bedtime, right? Where at around age 3, 4, 5, they're realizing, oh, everybody else has a life that doesn't include mine. And so then, right, they're placing themselves within this larger scope, but they can't sort of conceive of that, of the right, forever, as you're saying, like that they're sort of getting the sense that there's something bigger than themselves, but they can't go all the way there.
Correct. Right. And so they, and that actually will take me to one important thing that parents can do, which is to never equate death. We'll get to do's and don'ts later, I know, but sleeping is not the same as dead. And sleeping is scary for kids because they're separated. It means I'm separating, just like you were saying, I'm doing something different from everybody else and I'm separating. But it's very important for us to even though dead people look like they're asleep, it's very important for us, and we'll talk about how to explain this stuff later. But what they understand is a lot of confusion. And one of the things that's hard for parents is it's important to remember that when I say to you, as an adult, so-and-so is dead, you understand that we're never going to see that person again. When you say that to a 3-year-old, no matter how many, or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, no matter how many times you explain it, they're going to come back and ask you what you might think of as weird questions. Like when my grandfather died, I was 6 and my little brother was 5. And as we were walking home from the funeral, he said, that was fun. Grandpa's, that was really fun. When are we going to have another funeral for Grandpa? Like he just had no concept that they don't have a concept of beginning or an end, of eternity or finality. They just don't understand it. So it's really good to have books about death and dying, and it's good to have conversations about death, to always repeat, like as an example, what they understand is, what they need to understand, or a way that they can grasp it is, when you're dead, you don't breathe anymore, you don't eat anymore, you don't pee or poop anymore, you don't do any of the things that you don't talk, you never get to see your family again, your family doesn't get to see you. It's just hard for them, to get it. So it does require saying the same things over and over again, maybe in different ways. Eventually they turn 7 or 8 and they start to understand it.
And in that way, it's funny because we're talking about death and dying as if it's like this thing. And I think it's a thing because we make it a thing, right? It's not so different from sex, which we also make a thing, by the way. But any number of topics where the developmental progression is one of a spiral, right? Where we keep coming back to things and we keep coming back. And I remember one of the things you told me actually when my father died was a story from you raising your kids, which was they're going to have a different understanding of the same death at age 3 than they are at age 9. Because now at age 9, they are starting to understand eternity, and they are starting to understand that we put bodies in the ground, or we burn them, right? And so that takes on a different connotation. And so now they may be thinking about those events in the past and experiencing those in a new way.
Just like adults do. I mean, you experience the death of your father very differently now than you did when you were younger and when it was more recent. It takes on different meanings, and creates different fears and different regrets. It's the same with kids, only theirs has more to do with understanding the finality of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's always so interesting to me how do I want to say this? They are whole people who are learning how to be in this world, right? It's not, they're not empty vessels. They're just learning. They're learning, and we have to teach them, but we have to figure out how to do that with the people that they are.
And I one of the things that I always find perplexing is how we as parents, we start out life as parents with this little, very frighteningly vulnerable thing that our job is to protect it and to keep it safe and fed. There doesn't seem to be a specific point where somebody says, well, for me, there was never a point where somebody said to me, your job is not to protect this person for his or her entire life. Your job is to help this person turn into an adult. And I remember exactly the moment where now this is embarrassing, but my son was 10 before I realized I had this big aha moment, and I said, oh my God, if I don't get going, he's not going to grow up to be a good adult. But obviously we all want our children to grow up to be good adults and smart adults and adults who understand life and death. And and death is something that we want them to understand. It's more important. I mean, it's like we want them to know how to tie their shoes, and we want them to know how to do laundry, and we want them to know how to say please and thank you. And death is just one of those, and sex are things that we just it's just our job. only we are so scared of talking about death that we are scared to talk about it with our kids.
So, which brings us perfectly into, okay, so what are some do's for how we should be talking about death with our kids, and what are some don'ts? And pick where you want to start, or we can go back and forth.
I can go back and forth. Well, I'm going to start with my pet peeve, which you know, which is to use the word death and to use the word die, and try to avoid euphemisms like pass away or move on, because kids, they just don't understand that.
I just want to be really, really clear about what you're saying here. We should be using the word death.
Die. Correct.
Die. That someone has died, not that they have moved on, passed away.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, I know that I don't want to offend anybody whose religious tradition uses different terminology. So people have to take this advice as it is. But one of my pet peeves as a grief counselor is when I hear on people on television who are giving news that so-and-so has passed away. And it just grates on me, because it's not,
well, it's not at all clear to somebody who doesn't know what that means.
Right. So, before I talk about do's and don'ts, I think it's really important to, if we just use the dying or death of a grandparent as an example, I think it's, because that's just common with our kids. Mm-hmm. It's really important, if you think that a grandparent is near death, to let your children know that, because you're going to be, it happens that grandparents have prolonged illnesses, and it's really important if and when an illness becomes terminal, for us to share that information with our kids. So, for instance, my father had a chronic illness that but over a period of weeks and months, he was getting worse, and I was on my way out to see him, and I sat down with the kids and I said, I'm going out to Ohio to see Poppy. He's had this heart condition for a long time, so I'm reminding them of what they already know. And I say, I don't think that he's about to die, but I want you to know that if I do think he's about to die, I will tell you. I'm going to try and not have any surprises for you. And that's really important, because kids need to be able to live their lives, and they will continue to live their lives. But they need to know that they don't have to worry minute by minute, like, is mom telling us what we need to know? So I went out and I told them that I didn't think he was going to die. And then I came back, and literally I walked in the door and I got a phone call that he was about to die. And I turned around and left, and I sat them down with me. I know exactly what chair I was sitting in. And I said, remember when I told you that I didn't think Poppy was going to die? Well, that's changed now, and his heart's taken a turn for the worse. And I'm going to go out there, and Dad's going to bring you tomorrow, and I think he's going to die. Well, it's sad, and the conversation is difficult, but I wasn't hysterical, and they weren't hysterical. They were, I don't know if I would say that they were grateful, but they were not freaked out, because I was very, 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 very clear with them. So kids will ask you, is so-and-so going to die? And you should just say
the truth.
Say the truth. And if you don't know, then you say, I don't really know, but I'll tell you when I do know. So I'm just going to say some important things, different phrases that we could say and different ways to say them. So, for instance, I don't think people really do this anymore, but they might. You don't ever want to say so-and-so has gone away or has gone on a long trip, because then you have, why did he go on a trip without me? When is he coming back? Why is everybody crying if he just went on a trip? So don't say something like that. If you want to say, don't say so-and-so died, now she's going to be at rest and sleeping forever. Because the last thing we want is for our kids to think that sleep is the same as death.
Yeah, just at a practical level.
Yeah, right.
We want
right.
to go to bed.
And then they'll also think that Grandpa is gonna wake up because I wake up every morning, so Grandpa will wake up. Mm-hmm. You kind of, if you're going to talk about somebody's illness, you don't want to say he was really sick and then he died, because you get sick sometimes and kids get sick sometimes, and so you have to explain with a little more detail that he had something called cancer, or he was in a car crash or whatever. He had something that was very serious and the doctors couldn't make him better. But you have to, I think one thing that's really important to remember about most kids, even older than the group that we're talking about, is that not only are they frightened by the information that we're giving them, what they're really frightened about is what's going to happen, what's going to happen to them. They are narcissists, and they're maybe not thinking about themselves as going to die if they hear that somebody's dying, but they're going to think of their parents as dying. So you want to make sure that you sort of separate, if you can separate one kind of illness from when they had croup, right? The other thing that people don't think about too often is that they say, so-and-so died. Like if somebody dies and they're in their 90s, you say, well, they died because they were, they were old, and people die. But I have been in classrooms with children who I ask them how old they think I am. And the range is, sometimes they think I'm 20. And when I was 60, some of them said, are you 72? Like, they have no idea.
100 years old.
They have no idea. To a 3-year-old, to a 4-year-old, to a 5-year-old, a teenager is old. Yeah. So certainly their parents are old, and for sure their grandparents are old, but to say that so-and-so died because they were old, because they died of old age, is a really, it's just a dangerously murky.
We want to be really, really clear about.
It was really, really.
Yeah. Very, very old, have lived a long, long time.
Yes.
Longer than me, right? We want to really explain that out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So those are sort of the major do's and don'ts, unless you can think of another question.
Well, I think I want you to spend a little bit of time, a little bit more time on what it means to tell kids the truth. One of the things that's been coming up a lot as we're recording this right now is, well, first of all, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Second of all, we're in the middle of some racial conversations, difficult, which have always been difficult, but some discussions around race. And so one of the things that I've been really stressing in my communication to parents is tell the truth. When I say something like that, what I mean is tell the truth at the developmental level that's appropriate for your child, and answer the questions that your child asks you. So can you sort of relate that to the conversations that we're having with our kids about death and dying?
Yeah. Well, I'm a hard ass when it comes to telling the truth about death and dying. I think, talking about the pandemic, I'm just going to go back for a second. Talking about the pandemic, or my kids were little when 9/11 happened, or talking about racial justice is way more complicated. And so I'm glad you're not asking me about that. To answer
That'll be a different conversation.
Because it's just, things are more. I don't feel that there's that much nuance or room for wiggling when it comes to death and dying, because it happens to everybody. And I guess I just feel that we have a responsibility to prepare our children for it happening in their lives. So, and in the example that I gave earlier of these people who weren't going to tell their children that great grandma had died, I was just like, well, how are you, what are you going to do? I mean, what are you going to do when they want to see her again? I'm going to tell you another example that of the importance of the truth. Years and years and years ago, a friend of mine's sister committed suicide. She was an alcoholic, and she shot herself. And me and my friend and I had children the same age, and she wasn't going to tell. She told her child that Aunt so-and-so died, and the child says, her little girl says, well, how did Aunt so-and-so die? Well, she just died very suddenly. Well, was there blood? Yes, there was blood. Was she sick? No, she wasn't sick. Now, this is somebody who had, there was alcoholism ran in this family. And I was appalled that this conversation took place, because I knew that if you tell a child, a 7 or 8 year old child or younger, that so-and-so died, suddenly they weren't sick and there was a lot of blood. Even me as a grown-up, if you said that to me, I think, well, how am I going to go through life? How am I going to go to sleep? How am I going to do anything if this could happen suddenly with no reason, no explanation at all? So I did say to my friend, I said, there's alcoholism in your family. I didn't do what I wanted to do, which was to jump on this person and, and strangle her.
Don't learn well in that situation.
No, but I said, listen, this is you have an opportunity to, even if you don't want to talk about other people in the family who have alcoholism, this is an opportunity to talk about depression. It's an opportunity to talk about substance abuse, and it's an opportunity to talk about the importance of getting help when you are feeling bad. So just in general, the bad things that happen in our children's lives, somebody dying, big world, global events, global tragedies, when they're older, heartbreak, a girlfriend or boyfriend dumps them, the pain of social interactions when they're in 7th grade, that kind of stuff. I have a counterintuitive approach to most people, which is I look at them as an opportunity to teach a child, to comfort a child, and to help a child develop resilience. I was never a person, when people always say, how can they dump my daughter? She's and I was like, she's 14 years old or she's 16 years old. Heartbreak is the greatest thing ever when you're a teenager, because people are going to have heartbreak. You want them to have it now when they're young, and when you can help them through it, or their friends can help them through it, or a therapist can help them through it. If you go through life without ever having dealt with death, if you go through life without ever understanding tragedy, without having a tragedy, I feel bad. I feel bad for you, because you haven't learned how to go through, how to be a human. Yeah, how to go through life. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that takes us full circle. I think it's, it really is about the circle of life. Oh, you wanted to say something about, and now I'm remembering because I left my notes upstairs when we had to switch locations. Yeah. How do people talk about this with respect to religion? How do those, tell me about what we're saying to kids about death, staying factual.
Oh, you mean like heaven?
Yeah, heaven or not, or like, how do we deal with that? And then there was a Lion King reference that I wanted you to.
Yes, yeah. Yes. Well, every faith tradition has its own guidelines for mourning, and every faith tradition, I think, has its thoughts and tenets about what happens after we die. And so everybody has to decide how, if you're a very religious Orthodox person and you believe that when someone dies, they're in heaven and God has called them home and they're in a better place, and that works for you, then you teach it to your children. Mm-hmm. if on the other hand, so there's this range. I'm certain that he's in heaven with God, and it's a better place, and he's with everybody else in heaven, and heaven's up up in the sky and all. If that works for you, then that's what you should be teaching your children. The other side of the spectrum is, I have no idea. I don't have a faith tradition to rely on. You're gone, that's it. You have to, there are so many nuances in between those two extremes, that people just have to make their own, how can I say this? Regardless of your faith tradition and regardless of what you think happens afterwards, you do have a parenting responsibility to share the scientific fact that so-and-so is dead and is not coming back. Right. So I don't think
one doesn't preclude the other.
Huh?
One doesn't preclude the other.
Right. And I think that you, yes, I would just say, pick and choose what you want to share them about, what your religion believes, and pick and choose what religious rituals you want to participate in or not. But don't pretend that something hasn't happened. I mean, the biggest thing about, I remember saying this to you yesterday when we were talking about it. When somebody dies, it's sad. And we're all supposed to be sad, but and sometimes it happens too soon, and sometimes it happens in a way that is tragic. But grief is sad. Grief is not bad. Grief is it's true for adults and it's true for children, that the more we try to push it down and pretend that it's not happening, the worse it is later. Now, I fully understand that tragedies happen and people are ill-equipped to deal with them. And sometimes, I was listening to Pete Davidson on a podcast, and he was talking about how his father died when he was 6 years old, and I can't remember how his father died, but basically the death of a parent the death of his parent marked him for the rest of his life. And everything that I have said about grandparents dying and pets dying and global tragedies are nothing when you're talking about the death of a parent. So if we're talking about the death of a parent for a young child, that is a whole different situation that I would not be cavalier about some of my rules, because that is a situation that is fundamentally undergirding a child's life forever.
Yes, and a lot of what you've said still applies.
Yes.
Right? Irrespective of who it is who dies. Yes, we can both agree that the death of a parent is a significantly different event.
Yeah.
Has an outsized effect on somebody's whole life, everything, yeah. Right? And yet, it is. I don't want to say it's just, but it is a really, really big example of resilience, of the potential to overcome, of all of those things, right? I don't know anything about the story of what did you say his name was?
Pete Davidson.
Pete Davidson. I don't actually know who that is.
Oh, he's a comic on SNL.
Okay. Right. So who knows what would have happened to him had his father not died when he was 6, right. But irrespective, I think the principles still hold.
Yes. So I remember how to tie in the Lion King reference. So many people today don't have a faith tradition that they can lean on, and don't really have an idea of, don't have a formula of how they think about the afterlife. And so when we were talking about this earlier, what I said was everybody should just go watch The Lion King, because there's this scene that gives me goosebumps when I think about it, where Simba is trying to figure out what to do with the rest. Should he go back to the what do you call it? The tribe?
The pride.
The pride. Should he go back to the pride? And all, he's having his big Hamlet crisis, and then he looks in a pond of water, in a pool of water, and he sees his father saying, Simba, having words of inspiration. He loved his father. His father got murdered, And kids can understand, and I think for me, the most comforting thing for me to understand as an adult, regardless of what of my religion, I feel, and regardless of what I believe happens to people when we die, I feel in my heart and know in my head that people live on in us after they die. So it's one thing for me to say this to you because you understand this, but with a child, you can say, if somebody says, well, will I ever see Grampy again? No, we're not going to see him again, but you have the same curly hair that he has, and he loved you so much, and he taught you how to play with Legos, and so you will carry him with you as you grow older.
Yep.
And so that is something that you don't have to have a faith tradition that you like or that you don't like. You don't have to have any beliefs. You don't have to understand anything, but it is something that you can explain to really the very youngest of children, that when people are gone, they are sometimes we carry them with us because we have their names. Mm-hmm. So that is something that kids do understand.
And actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to remember to say this too. I can't remember if it was you or somebody else, something that I read. Just because somebody dies doesn't mean you can't get to know them in new ways. And so I think about that often because we talk about my father often. And I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but we talk about him a lot because we say, oh, Grandpa, the running joke in our house is, oh my God, Grandpa would have loved whatever it is. Food,
yes.
Place,
I talk about your father.
Activity. Well, he was a good guy. But my kids know what my father, who has been gone for 9 years, they know what he likes or liked. That's a beautiful gift. Sometimes I look in the mirror and I think, oh my God, there's my dad. Mm-hmm. So, all of that, it keeps coming back. And so just like, this spiral of development that we talk about, we keep having these conversations, and death and dying is, as you say, part of life. It keeps going. It's all of what makes us human. So we're going to wrap up on that note. And thank you so much, Martha. I love you.
Let me just say one last thing. I have resources and books and suggestions which I can share with you that you can share on, I don't know how you want to.
We're going to make those available. I'm going to figure out how to make them available, but there'll be a link under this video for people to access those. Thank you so much.
Well, this is really fun. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Take care.
Okay. Bye.